Then on the psychology side, and again, it's always quite interesting for me doing talks about the psychology side, thinking if I was sitting on the other side when I was ill and someone talked about psychology and ME, I'd probably get a little bit irritable about it. But I guess the thing that's important to say here is we're definitively not saying that ME, chronic fatigue and group of illnesses, are caused or perpetuated by psychology, but they're factors often in what's going on. As we talk about this a bit more, this probably will make it a bit clearer that, for example, often there's people and I should say also with the subgroups, by the way, it's not that you're one of these. Very often it's a combination of these together, and that's often the impact of it. But on the anxiety side, it can often be that even before getting ill, we just had a tendency towards being a bit more of a nervous predisposition, or just having a bit more anxiety in terms of what's going on. If you didn't have anxiety before, you probably do now as a result of dealing with the situation and people not understanding what's happening. Situation where should I push myself, should I rest? If I rest, I'll probably feel better. If I push myself, I'll enjoy. You know, it's kind of like that in of itself causes a whole 5 sets of what I call mental tennis, where you're just going backwards and forwards in your head trying to work out what to do. The achiever subtype is basically where people are defining themselves by what they do and what they achieve. So this is basically where we're always pushing ourselves to do and to be more than we currently are. And the result of that, of course, is that our body may say, way before we even got sick, our body may have said, I'm tired, I need to rest. And actually what we do is, oh no, but I've got to go and do this. So rather than listening to what our body's saying, we're dictating what we do by what we think we need to do on the outside. With the helper subtype, it's a fairly similar thing, but what's determining what we do is what other people need. So for example, our body may be saying, oh, I need to stop, I need to rest. We're thinking, oh, but I promised so-and-so, and I've got to do this for this person, I must do that there. So again, we're placing consistently other people's needs before our own. And it's not that I'm promoting a completely selfish world where everyone just kind of goes, well, I must do what I always need. If someone's ill, they may absolutely need to do that. But I mean in kind of the general world. But there has to be a basic listening to our own needs. Because if we consistently ignore them, eventually our body is going to have to give us a wake-up call. The trauma subtype is basically where we've got some kind of trauma in our background which hasn't been properly processed. And what therefore happens, it ends up staying in our system. And this could be a fairly major trauma, like someone that's come back from a war zone, and so they've had all the trauma of seeing that. And it may be that, for example, every time a car backfires or something, they have a whole traumatic response because it's triggering memories that they haven't been able to process. Or it can be, the trauma of a car accident or something like that. Or it may be what we call covert trauma, or trauma with the small t, where it's not any one big event, but it may be a series of small things that together have a cumulative effect. And without disappearing too far into kind of child psychology, it could be something as simple as not having enough physical holding and nourishment in the environment. So, for example, as a child, we had needs that constantly weren't being seen. So we learned that our needs can't be met by the world. So we then start to learn inside of ourselves, my needs won't get met, therefore I'll just ignore them. But again, we do that consistently through life, and that has an impact on our physical body. So there's a lot more we could say about each of these, and there's a lot of stuff on the internet. We've talked about this stuff in a lot more detail. But I guess really the main thing we're saying here is that there seem to be patterns, and not everyone perfectly fits this picture, but there seem to be patterns of certain historical things that have been going on prior to getting ill. And there seem to be enough nods in the room that there seem to be some familiarity in hopefully what we're saying here. So these predisposing factors, or what we call the 7 subgroups, are the things that tend to be happening prior to someone developing any kinds of symptoms. And then what we have is either a trigger, so we have what we call fast onset. These are just a very small few examples. It could be a virus, it could be emotional stress like divorce or losing a job or something like that, or bankruptcy. It could be a vaccination. Some people have had triggers through that. It could be an operation. There's a whole series of things that it could be. But very often the trigger is something that happens to us which becomes the final straw. You can also, I don't know if you can quite see it, 'cause it's not very much a different colour on here, but we also, as Sanna mentioned, you can also have what we call gradual onset, where there's not one final event, there's just somehow a kind of series of things together which then become too much. So this is often the picture of what happens to the point that someone starts to get symptoms. When you start to get symptoms, you've got a whole new complexity which comes in, which is suddenly you haven't just got all the things that are going on before, you've now got dealing with this apparently mysterious illness of not knowing what's wrong with you, why it's wrong with you, what you should do about it, are you ever going to recover? If you were struggling to kind of help and support other people beforehand, if that tendency is still there, even if you can't do that now, you've got something else that comes in, guilt, that you feel guilty that you can't help people, you know, or if there's anxiety that was going on beforehand, suddenly you've got something really major to be worried about. You know, if the immune stuff was going on before and suddenly your system's even more depleted, you've got no resources to fight off infections and viruses and bugs and that kind of thing. And you know, there's an interesting thing that Sanna actually did a video blog on, went out a few months ago, but interesting in the immune system, you see some groups of patients where they never get sick. And it's almost like their immune system goes into hyper alert. They're often the same people that seem to have a lot of intolerances and allergies because their system's reacting, not getting sick, but it's reacting to everything. And you have other people where it's the opposite. They just seem to be catching everything that goes around. But we'll talk a little bit about some of the perpetuating factors, and then what we'll do is we'll go into a bit more detail, just a few examples of some of the different things that are going on. But the maladaptive stress response is basically, as I've kind of mentioned a little bit already, it's basically a response that we see in the nervous system in a high percentage of patients, which is a direct result of being ill. But basically the body goes in to almost the exact opposite state it needs to be in to heal through the trauma of living with the situation. So this is where we get the state that we call tired but wired. And a lot of people may have experienced that, where you're completely exhausted, but you feel like your nervous system's on edge. And you're completely exhausted all day, then you can't sleep at night, for example. Which, until you understand what's actually caused that, just makes no sense. How can you feel that tired and not sleep? And I won't go into lots of detail about the maladaptive stress response. Again, there's lots of stuff online.
I was going to say, I think the interesting thing again here is to understand the kind of how it all weaves together, because you look at, if you look at the nervous system and you look at the kind of psychological manifestations of that, but you also look at what your autonomic nervous system controls in your body. It's the stress side is really there to, to help you survive in a fight or flight situation. But also at the same time, when that side is upregulated, what automatically happens is kind of the opposing side is downregulated. And interestingly, that side is the side that looks after really quite vital functions like your ability to rest, your ability to digest, your ability to detoxify. So suddenly, just that nervous system imbalance, which you're thinking, well, okay, yeah, it's sort of from neck up in some ways, actually has a very, very fundamental effect on the rest of your body. And if you're not digesting, well, that's really the most basic thing that you need in life to bring fuel into your body. And you may be eating, but you're not really getting the nutrients from the food, and therefore you're not able to produce energy, you're not able to repair, you're not able to run an efficient immune system, etc., etc., etc. So yeah. I think it's just an important one to kind of, or it's a nice way of looking at, you can realise how it all kind of links together. Yeah,
and I think the important thing we're saying here is this is an example of a fact that's going on for a lot of people. It's not the main, it's not the only thing for a lot of people, and doesn't affect everyone, but it's a factor that explains a lot of, in terms of putting together the talk, what we think about is what are some of the bits that when we explain it, people go, oh God, that explains it, that makes some sense.